Good evening, everybody, and welcome to MAM Conversations with Meryl McMaster. I'm Leah Fox, Director of the Vance Wall Art Education Center at the Montclair Art Museum. Before we begin introductions, please note that closed captioning is available through the caption icon at the bottom of your screen. This program is also being recorded. We recognize with deep respect these ancestral Lenape homelands and waters where we are gathered today. This is Lenape-Hoking, native land, as well as a home and a crossroads for Indigenous people from many nations to this day. This statement is one of many works in progress here at MAM. As individuals and as an institution, we serve to redress the expropriation, exclusion, and harms that museums have conducted through establishment, collection, and display over the course of our history. We commit to practices that center Indigenous people, not just today, but as vital to our ongoing work. We are honored to have this time with Meryl McMaster in celebration of the recent opening of her exhibition, Meryl McMaster Chronologies, on view at MAM through September 17th. Meryl McMaster lives in Chelsea, Quebec. She belongs to the Red Pheasant Cree Nation in Saskatchewan, is a member of the Siksika Nation in Alberta, and has Métis, British, and Dutch ancestry. She earned her Bachelor's of Fine Arts in Photography from Toronto's OCAD University and many awards and accolades for her work. McMaster's work has been acquired by significant public collections within Canada and the United States, including the National Gallery of Canada, the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, the Nelson Atkins Museum, the Heard Museum, the Eiteljorg Museum, and the National Museum of the American Indian. She has had numerous solo and group exhibitions and publications, including a significant new retrospective exhibition, as well as the first monograph of her work, both entitled Meryl McMaster Bloodline. The retrospective is currently on view at the McMichael Canadian Art Collection in Ontario and will travel to its collaborating institution, the Ramey Modern in Saskatchewan, among other venues. Meryl McMaster will be in dialogue this evening with MAM's Curator of Native American Art, Laura J. Allen. Since 2021, Allen has led research, stewardship, exhibition, and community relationships for MAM's historical and contemporary Native art collection. Previously, she served as a curatorial associate at the American Museum of Natural History's Division of Anthropology for the recent reinstallation of its renowned Northwest Coast Hall. She received her MA in Decorative Arts, Design History, and Material Culture from the Bard Graduate Center in New York City, where she focused on critical and collaborative museological practices, Northwest Coast art, and Indigenous dress, fashion, and textiles more broadly. I want to thank MAM staff involved in the production of tonight's event, including Jack Gianduzzo, Education Technology Systems Associate. I hope everyone joining us this evening will have the opportunity to visit the museum this spring, as I think you'll agree that between the exhibitions, programs, and events, there's something for everyone. Also on view this spring is Vanessa German. Please imagine all the things I cannot say. Vanessa German is a self-taught sculptor, painter, poet, and performance artist who is interested in art as a form of healing and protection, especially for African Americans. We are honored to welcome Vanessa German to MAM for the 7th annual Galen Family Artist Lecture on Thursday, April 20th. Complete information is available on our website, and you can also follow us on social media. This is an exciting time at the museum and a great time to consider becoming a member of MAM. If you're not yet a member, I want to personally invite you to join our member family. Member benefits include free admission to the museum's galleries, which includes Meryl McMaster's exhibition, 20% discount on classes and programs, invitations to exhibition opening receptions, and much more. For more information, visit montclairartmuseum.org. Before we begin tonight's program, I want to take a moment to remind you that you are invited to share questions or comments for the speakers using the Q&A feature. Now, I will turn the program over to Meryl McMaster and Laura Allen.
Thanks so much, Leah. And thank you, Meryl. So good to be here with you today. All right, I want to get started with an image that really made an impression on me years ago when I saw it. It's from your 2019 series, As Immense as the Sky, and it really gripped me. It's complex, it's beautiful, and there's so much meaning embedded in this image. But I felt when I first saw it, as many of you might be feeling right now too, that while some references are recognizable, there's a pervasive sense of feeling unsettled or unsure about what you're seeing. It's simultaneously engrossing and jarring. And I think that part of that feeling is due to the sort of uncanny nature of the figure's pose in this image. It's not really clear whether the figure's moving towards you or walking away from you. And the other day, I remember we were talking, Meryl, and you commented on how with your images, you're often inviting the viewer to follow you through these scenes of magical realism. So I just wanted to say, I'm so grateful that we can follow along with you today to dive into your very intentional practice and your incredible work. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for including me in the exhibition.
It's been great. So for many of you who might be unfamiliar with or less familiar with Meryl's work, I thought I would just offer a brief introduction. You'll be hearing from Meryl more than me in this conversation, so let me just start with a few words to set the stage. So Meryl's output is primarily photography, although she is newly experimenting with film, and we're going to discuss that a little bit later in the program. She mainly produces works in series, and sometimes a series will have like around 8 to 10 works. Meryl, is that right? In each?
Yeah, about that. Yeah, some are more, but yeah, it's a good kind of approximate.
Good. So, you know, with that, her practice is far richer and incredibly methodical than, you know, much photography alone. Meryl's a scrupulous researcher and intellectual. She was certainly nurtured in this field in the fields of art history and art from a young age. Her father is Gerald McMaster, who's a renowned curator, writer, and academician. Meryl creates all of the ensembles and props to use in her images, sometimes with help from community members. And she sometimes will create accompanying writings, such as poetry and narration, which you can hear in the exhibition. We've got a couple of audio features and certainly the film. And then she wears her ensembles for the images, cited in very intentional landscapes, often landscapes that are and lands that are important to her family and to cross-cultural histories. And then she performs in the scenes with natural light, using natural light and almost no augmentation. And some of the themes that are frequently in her work are land, lineage, identity, and memory, history and colonialism, and the world beyond what we can see. So one place I wanted to get started at is to think about this term self-portraiture. This is a term that, you know, we've even used in the exhibition, but you've talked about how your work is a bit more ambiguous than that. So perhaps you can talk a little bit about representations and personas in your work.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that I started, you know, kind of pretty early on in my kind of starting to, you know, figure out my voice as an artist. kind of exploring this this kind of realm of self-portraiture, when I was really starting to think about, my personal identity privately, but then also thinking about kind of bringing that into my images. I do remember like my early influences that I loved looking at were, of course, people like Cindy Sherman, Tracy Moffat, was someone I was really interested in, her process and her work. Frida Kahlo, Rebecca Belmore, Anna Mendieta. So to kind of name a few. So I remember early on, even kind of within high school, kind of looking at these women and and how they kind of did this self-portraiture, but also transformed themselves as well, and kind of created these layers to their work. So then when I guess started kind of using my own body within my images was probably towards the end of my undergrad in university, and I kind of felt like it made sense to work with myself, because as I was just saying, I was starting to really kind of dive deep, exploring who I was, and specifically I was kind of looking at these different cultures and heritages that I was a part of. And so so I think that's when I started to kind of realize that I wanted to kind of explore some of those personal identity themes within myself. And then I was also really shy to work with other people. So that kind of, was kind of a, easy decision. And then, it was affordable too. So all those things, but I'd say it is tricky, like, cause I feel like there are a lot of times when my images aren't these kind of like classic, self-portraits. I guess when you think of, that definition of a self-portrait, because I feel like when you look at my images, no two works are kind of ever the same, or at least kind of these, these different personas or kind of characters that I'm embodying, are never quite the same. So, but, kind of within my images, I'm always, kind of potentially representing myself and kind of exploring these kind of questions that I'm asking myself, or trying to kind of sort out in other circumstances within my images. I'm, thinking about a specific person. It could be a family member that maybe I'm, again, trying to embody, or it could be a character kind of within a story that I've been told, which that comes into play within my work. So so these kind of different transformations kind of just gives me agency to tell different stories, and so that's why it's kind of sometimes ambiguous, like, even though I'm predominantly in all my works, it's I guess not always, it's not always like maybe my story that I'm telling, or so like, as you mentioned, I kind of within my images, I've kind of gravitated to this style of kind of magic realism, and so kind of working with and kind of portraying these realistic views of the world, but then adding kind of these elements of magic, kind of dreamlike qualities to the works. And I think this approach has been influenced by Indigenous storytelling. I think when I think about all the different influences that I kind of draw on, this kind of so I guess hopefully I think that kind of hopefully kind of describes kind of my thoughts, but it is kind of tricky sometimes to nail it down completely. But I do usually label it self-portraiture because it can, yeah.
Oh, that's great, and very, touched on a lot of points we haven't talked about before. I think that's really helpful, and really great to hear your influences too, which are evident in the works, although you have obviously a real unique perspective. And actually, that's a nice segue, talking about some of your earlier pieces. I have a few here, and we're not going to dive deep into some of these images, but I think this is a kind of a quick arc of some of your works over your career to show how your lens has been more focused on the self in some cases and then backed out. So let's just look at a few. This work is actually not in the exhibition. This is from 2010. I think you were still at OCAD at that time.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, this was again, as I just mentioned, these were my one part of a series where this is where I was first using my body in my images. So my first kind of, portraits, I guess. So yeah, so when I was still in university, yeah.
Right. And even with that, you're embracing the tree, and not even a focus on sort of your face. Then this one a little bit later, from a work called Aphoristic Currents. This is where you were experimenting in the studio, which you haven't done too much of, or you've left that behind a bit.
Well, this actually, it might look like it's in the studio, but it's actually
it's
outside.
You're right, I see it.
But I guess with this image, it's in my backyard. So so in some of my earlier works, I was really staying in a sense, well, close to home, so this one actually I was standing on a ladder in my backyard and having the camera low down shooting up into the sky, but yeah, so the place I guess wasn't, the landscape, in some of these works wasn't this kind of equal kind of character or kind of, subject within the images, but it was more about, the kind of the costuming or these kind of different sculptural elements that, I was creating, to create those layers in the image. So.
That's great. Yeah, I see it now.
Yeah.
It changes my feeling about the image actually when I know more and I can, look a little more closely. So then, and we'll show another one from around this time that actually is in the exhibition. This one is in the show. It's the largest work in the show, and at this point, you're really backing out, and you're describing and commenting on these greater historical and cultural narratives, even though the self and the figure is still at the core. And again, we see you walking and leading us toward the story and into the story. And this one, we'll get into this a little bit more later, but this was I think the first time you had traveled on a plane to a very specific place for a site-specific image beyond sort of your immediate or closer surroundings.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
And now your current project, which in some sense it has a tighter view in a lot of the images, but yet you're exploring these many generations of your family history. So it's expansive in that direction. And I also am, seeing an increasing focus on Plains Cree language. There's a lot of that in the exhibition, and focus on resurgence and resilience here, especially when it comes to your family. So we'll dive into a little bit more of this series later, but perhaps you can just talk a little bit about your current project and also how you've been experimenting with new media for the current series.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so so it's exciting to show new work, and I mean, even though some of these images are probably new to a lot of you, but But yeah, so this is, I just finished this series, Stories of My Grandmothers, just last year. And so it's pretty fresh, I guess. But for this project, I was drawing upon the lives of my paternal grandmothers who were of Plains Cree and Métis heritage, and collectively their lives, their lives span 130 years, which I'm kind of, looking at this time frame within the work, and they were living on red pheasant Cree Nation in Saskatchewan. And kind of the beginning inspirations for this series began after reading a diary that belonged to my great grandmother Bella Wetney, as well as a letter she also wrote. And the diary, it's this small little diary that just really wasn't like a journal. So it wasn't, kind of these long thoughts or anything, but it was more kind of these simple, kind of casually noted moments of her and her family's daily life on the reserve, kind of over this 1 year kind of time frame. And then the letter that she wrote in her late 70s was had a different tone to it. There was kind of more in a sense of her voice within it, which was really kind of a surprising and kind of contrasting to view these kind of two documents. But yeah, it was more kind of, I don't know who she was writing it to, but it was more describing her kind of her whole life and kind of her dire situation of trying to get assistance to build a house of her own from money that she was actually owed from the government, which she never ended up receiving. So these kind of couple of items, just personally, kind of stoked this like curiosity within me about just wanting to know more details that weren't, kind of written within these documents about her, as well as my two other grandmothers. So through my research process that started like almost 2.5 years ago, I guess, I started interviewing family members. So I have two great aunts and uncles that are still alive, who remember all three of these women. I talked with cousins, and then also my father. And I was, trying to kind of piece together, these, different, times that I was reading about, these photographs, and just trying to kind of fill in the blanks of these women's lives. I did know my grandma a little bit, but the other two women I never met. So they were really these, kind of ghosts in a way that I was, trying to kind of connect to. Also kind of looking at their more personal stories and getting those from my family members. I also was kind of thinking about these larger moments that would have affected them as well, that was happening in and around, their community, which was the effect of kind of the colonial rule that they were living under, such as, the Indian Act and residential school systems, to kind of just name a few. And so with that, kind of building this narrative and thinking about how is transgenerational knowledge and memory kind of passed down, to ancestors when they're going, they're living through this kind of new environment of assimilation, and also just like really, how do you know your ancestors, and And so those were kind of beginning questions, you know, I was thinking about when kind of building this body of work. But yeah, you were right. I was, kind of the style of the images. I was kind of, kind of maybe blending some ideas that I had been, and kind of styles, I guess I've been working with in my past works. But something that was new that you mentioned was me working in film. So I had for a long time, so this is good. This is still from the film I Awake to You. And I had wanted to work in film for a long time. But I think it's kind of, a new medium sometimes can feel a bit daunting when you feel like you might need help as well to kind of, because with, how I take the photograph is with a very, very small, like I use team, like in quotations, because it's like one or two people and they're usually close family members or friends in the past that have helped me. So, and they're usually not professional artists or photographers. So, so I didn't really know any filmmakers, and I definitely knew that that I didn't want my camera on a tripod, which is how I work when I'm photographing, is my camera's on a tripod, and so I knew that I wanted it obviously to be more, moving and cinematic, and so anyway, so I it took a long time to kind of meet different people and just build connections that way, and also like build my confidence up to move from like the still imagery to this different way of moving, different way of storytelling. But I definitely felt that filmmaking, could kind of like stretch time and kind of all these stories and fragments that I was working with. It could help kind of condense some of these moments just to kind of just tell this larger story. So, but anyways, I met 2 years ago, a couple of years ago, I met or more David, who's my co-director on the film. And we just hit it off. He was actually filming an interview of me for a museum. And he was with me for just like a whole day. And again, we hit it off, and I felt like, and I really liked his style. He's a documentary filmmaker. So this was also a first kind of for him in terms of, kind of, a different way of, within his work as well. So, but so we kind of found each other, and over kind of a year, worked on these two films that were filmed both in and around where I live in Chelsea, Quebec, but then also we traveled out to Saskatchewan to Red Pheasant, where my family's from, and filmed there, as well as kind of the Battlefords area, which is kind of outside the Red Pheasant community. So this film is, again, it's inspired by these stories of my grandmother. And as I was learning more about them, and also learning more about, kind of these, again, larger, historical events that they were living through, I found so much that, their stories were, about survival and resilience and really this self-determination. And so the film, the two films really talk about that, but this one, there was a lot of also reference to trees within the diary, and even the letter, this idea of kind of having to build a home of one's own. But trees came up as an important part of their daily lives. So, a lot of times, they would be daily collecting wood for warmth, They would obviously use wood for shelter, economic livelihoods of selling wood in town, also traditional medicine as well. And so you see here in this image on the screen, the image on the right is showing actually my great grandma Bella cleaning the windows in the back, and then my dad is actually the little boy in the middle holding a rabbit. And then my great aunt Mabel, who is still alive, who I interviewed and talked with for some stories and everything, and my uncle on the left. But you'll see this kind of tree that was planted outside their house, which was a house that all three grandmothers lived in with the kids my dad grew up in. And yeah, the tree is still in the landscape, and you'll see on the left side of the screen this large tree from the screenshots. So that's the tree that's grown over many years. The house is no longer there, but I visited this site, this location, so many times over my life. It's very familiar. And the film kind of follows me on this journey that's kind of in and out of dreaming, and it kind of, one point in the dream, I'm kind of transported to a new location. I'm transported close to this tree, and in a way, it's, even though I've been there lots of times, but in the film, it's almost like I'm kind of there for the first time, discovering my grandmothers and this kind of this marker I see as the tree is just memory and time, and again this connection to family, and then there's moments where I'm kind of reliving diary entries through the film, and but it was a very interesting, it was a exciting, challenging process, and very different from my photographs. I mean, I felt like my photographs felt complicated, but then film added like a different layer in a different way. But I mean, I think that it's what I wanted. I did want the photographs to kind of feel like they kind of came alive in a way, and so I think that it in a way kind of achieved that, and just I mean, the photographs are kind of almost this snapshot of this moment, and you don't really know what the the beginning maybe of the story is and what the end of the story is, whereas the film has I mean, it does follow a little bit of a that kind of classic storytelling narrative, but it's still how I got there and how it ends. There's still that open-endedness to like my images, I think. So anyone can kind of imagine maybe what happens next, or so.
You've raised so many points I'd love to pivot with. I think we have some more pictures of family in the diary that Meryl mentioned, but this is a great description of the film and the process. I think you're so natural in it, and everything is so precise, just like your images. But I think your comments about it stretching time and being able to see the beginning and end of the story are really apt, because I have an image of the exhibition next, and one of the things that I was really struck by when you and I were talking about a year ago to plan this exhibition is how much your work disrupts linear concepts of time, how time is often a circle, or it dissolves, or it comes again and in and out of the images and the stories that you're telling in creative ways. And I think it sounds like a film was just another tool for you to also explore those concepts. I'll just say the exhibition is loosely organized chronologically, although the title that we chose really talks about how there are many, many such chronologies, and that a sort of a linear path is not is just one option. So I'll show another image of the exhibition here. Because I wonder if we should actually skip ahead to talking a little bit more about some of the other works in the new series. Certainly the older works we can dive into, but since you're bringing up all of these aspects, I'd really like to jump ahead and we can look at some of those family pictures and dive into some of the other works that tell these stories. Oh, but times gravity. Let's start with let's just do something with times gravity. Yeah. So this is the oldest work in the exhibition, and it was a real special one to start with. It's such an arresting image, and I think it really brings out that concept of time. It makes time visual. So maybe you could just tell us a few things about this image, and then we'll move to the current work.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that this particular image definitely kind of is more of I think goes back to that first question you were talking about, but this is more of a self-portrait for sure in this work that I'm kind of exploring. And for this image, Times Gravity, I was drawing on my personal history, to kind of think about those pivotal events in one's life that had shaped me from birth into my later 20s. And I think within this work, one thing I was like thinking about was just this kind of enormity or kind of weight of not just kind of personal, but like family and community and kind of national history, and partly how that has also kind of shaped who I am, as well as kind of who we all are. And so as you see, this image, like just a little bit of backstory for the inspiration for this image. So this image was taken in the winter months, and in Cree culture, the idea of storytelling really happens in the winter months, because it's believed that everything is sleeping and that the spirits kind of won't be disturbed. And it's also the time of year, so you brought up this image, where tribal historians would signify through drawings kind of these most kind of pivotal events of the year through what is called winter counts. So you see here different examples of that, these kind of simple drawings, either drawn on a hide or later on paper. And so I was inspired by this use of storytelling and history telling, and kind of took that and did my own winter counts. Now, I guess it is hard to kind of see, but on the kind of upper parts of the spines of these books, or you could see them as my memories or journals. There could be many meanings to these kind of these things that I'm holding, but I've drawn my own kind of winter counts of an important event that kind of shaped again who I am in my life. And so anyway, so that's kind of just a little bit about that, and just feeling kind of between histories, between kind of also working through my feelings of just understanding myself between these kind of two very different cultures that I was part of, and so that's just like a little bit about that work and that process.
So I think that's a really nice segue, because this is the span of a lifetime, or at least the lifetime, how old you were at the time you were making the image. I think you had the childhood on one side and your adult years
Yeah.
on the other, right?
Yeah.
So that there you were at this balance point. So let's skip ahead to the current series, which really dives into generational time and generational knowledge. And we're going to pass by the images of Edge of a Moment, which we can always go back to if people have questions. So if you do have a question, just put it in the Q&A about that. Okay. And I just want to acknowledge that there was a little bit of a typo in the PowerPoint. And so the work that you saw before was called Echoes Across the Field. And this is actually I Listened as the World Became Silent. So we'll fix that in
both
the recording.
both are
Yeah.
miscomings on the
So tell us this. So this image, I'll just go forward one screen to show the grandmothers, the maternal lineage that you described. And this particular image is inspired by an experience that your great grandmother Tilly might have had.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so
great.
So the furthest, yes, yeah, great. And so she, so on the picture on the left, she's the third, so it's the woman holding the baby, and then to her right, that's my great grandmother Tilly. So I Listened as the World Became Silent is inspired kind of about an experience that she might have been kind of witness to. Kind of one of the first historical events when I was doing my research was around the time that she would have been about 15 years of age. And it was an event in 1885 where a group of 8 Plains Cree warriors were publicly executed at Fort Battleford, which is in Saskatchewan and not far from the reserve where my family's from. And they were hung for the killing of an Indian agent and others whose policies were really keeping the Cree on this ongoing state of starvation and disease during another event called the Northwest Rebellion. And I guess for people who don't know what that is, it was this 5-month uprising led by a Métis man called Louis Riel against the Canadian government. And it was fought mainly by Métis, First Nations and other allies in what is now Saskatchewan and Alberta. And it was really to protect our rights, our land, and for survival. So what, through talking with family members and also looking at, kind of this time frame, what I found out was that the community was kind of directed to come view this hanging, but what was really, which is shocking in itself to just even think about, having to experience something like that. But what I found really, really upsetting is that the children who were at the Battleford Industrial School, which was a form of residential school in the area. It was a day school, but that my grandma Tilly attended, were forced to attend this execution and watch it. And basically through what my research was that it was, meant to be this warning to them, like if you, rebel against us, this is what will happen to you. And my family doesn't quite know. My great grandmother Tilly never talked about it, but she was at the school. She and was alive during this time period, so it's most likely that she would have went. But this image is kind of exploring and kind of processing kind of that event. And in the image, you'll see I have kind of pencils hanging down from my shoulder, which is this nod to the children who were there. And then, surrounding me are all these butterflies. And in Plains storytelling, butterflies are spirit beings. So they kind of, represent, the men as well as my ancestors kind of in those moments. And it's kind of trying to bring these memories, to the present. So, but I'm wearing this kind of fencing, kind of armor, protection gear. So.
That, that's made a huge impact on me when I saw this image. And I think for everybody who comes into the exhibition, and it's so important to acknowledge these histories and this colonial violence and its legacies. And I was taken by the choice of fencing as a protective jacket. And we do have a question about, what was your choice of the jacket? And perhaps also if you could say something about the symbols on the jacket as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, again, in my work, I use or kind of incorporate different styles of historical kind of dress or clothing within my works. Sometimes that kind of bring together these kind of histories that I'm part of. Sometimes borrowing and looking at as I said, historical kind of ways of dressing that my European ancestors kind of would have worn or used in some way, and then in combination with symbols and elements of my Indigenous culture. So it was kind of creating this this feeling of this kind of again, ambiguous kind of person in a way. Like I'm disguising, I'm kind of masking myself, but this kind of this protector feeling. And the paint or the elements that I painted on the jacket are stars. So they're kind of traditional representations in Plains culture of stars. And then there's kind of a bead on each of them.
That's great. I didn't know that. Thank you for the question.
Yeah.
So let's go and look at one more image. And we can also, anybody who'd like, we had some questions that we didn't answer, we can get back to, or if anybody else has other questions, I think we have still a little time. So let's look at one more image, from your current series. And this one also is just one of my favorites. Remember the Sky You Were Born Under. This is another complex image with a lot of symbology that was a direct outcome of that diary that you mentioned of your great-grandmother Bella. And we have a picture of her with a page from the diary. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the multiple generations of family that this image discusses.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. So it's good that you kind of can see kind of how I was trying to describe the diary. But one thing that struck me about her little kind of notes was that she would talk about collecting plants and roots, but she wouldn't kind of go into detail of how they were used or it would just be like, just a simple sentence. So through my asking questions of family members, I kind of was trying to understand, what they were doing, with these different plants and from those conversations, I learned that they were one thing, they were still, kind of privately practicing, again, through this time of kind of assimilation where a lot of cultural practices were illegal and suppressed. They were still kind of practicing traditional uses of traditional knowledge with plants. And one story that, I mean, my dad told me was that his grandma, so my great grandma Bella, in that photo he had really bad bee stings, and she got him to chew on poplar leaves, and poplar trees are really prevalent in the prairies, but she got him to chew on the leaves and then put that on his bee sting, and it would make it better. So so I just remember that story that my dad told me. But other things she mentions, these plants would be like mint, cattails. I mean, they use those a lot in baby diapers. Muskeg tea and rat root. Another one that was in the diary that when I was talking with my great aunt about that, she was telling me she was telling me, but it was written also in the diary. So I was asking her about it, was Seneca root. And so she was telling me that they would unearth Seneca root, and to generate a bit of a local economy, they would sell it in town to, that would be sent to pharmaceutical industries. So it was supposedly a huge industry in Canada before and after the Second World War, and Indigenous people were a big part in collecting and collecting this root, and basically, kind of well, in a sense, helping these pharmaceutical companies. But the root was you would chew it, but it would help with like respiratory illnesses. So the pharmaceutical industries were using it for pneumonia. That was one of kind of the big uses of it. So anyway, so within this image, I've kind of created all these different plants that were mentioned in the diary. I've used out of wire. I've created either the seed pods of the plant, or in some parts I did the flower, and telling the story of the importance of plants and seeds, in Indigenous traditional knowledge, but it's all important to everyone, as well. So I was kind of creating this kind of enveloping kind of around me of these plants, and then I'm holding the object that I'm holding is actually inspired by the digging implement that they would have used to unearth the Seneca root, and I discovered this through a painting of Alan Sapp, who's a well-known painter from the red pheasant community, and I saw a painting of his of women, kind of bent over with this shape of this kind of shovel, and I think it's called like digging Seneca root or something like that. So anyway, so I was inspired, kind of created my own kind of shovel, but I also thought it was interesting how it also had this cross-like kind of reference to, and because that was something that was brought in as part of, again, this assimilation process of Indigenous people into this European culture is bringing them into a different religion, and so anyways, so that shovel is kind of, I guess, referencing different things, and then again, it's kind of hard to see, but you kind of see my face is also covered in this pollen, and it's actually like freeze-dried mango and pineapple. So it was actually kind of yummy when it was all over me, but the bugs loved it, so that was not fun. But yeah. So anyways, that's a little bit about image. So.
And one question we had, the eyes on the shovel slash cross.
Oh,
Whose are
that's
those?
me. Oh, those are, yeah, that's me. Yeah, again, I was trying to, kind of, yeah, it doesn't have too much meaning, but it just, kind of creating, again, this kind of interesting element, to the work and yeah, again, yeah, talking again, like kind of layering the shovel and talking about the effects, of the different generations, of, again, this kind of colonial rule, as I was talking about, that affected my grandmothers and it has trickled down and affected how, I grew up and I'm having to reconnect with my culture and learn about that. So yeah.
And you are passing these stories on to next generations and in new ways, which is, I think, another top note from this extraordinary new body of work. So I think we're getting close to the end, and I have one more slide to highlight, and that's the fact that Leah had mentioned earlier that Meryl has a new monograph of her work. It's a gorgeous book that accompanies the exhibition in Canada right now, and it'll be available at our shop in a couple of months once the printing, the next printing comes around. And yeah, I'd encourage you to look more into her work and pick up this wonderful publication if you'd like to learn and see more. So if there's no other questions, let's see, I think, okay, one last question. We can try to make this short. Maybe Meryl, you can say something about the language that we're seeing, the non-English language that we're seeing on the titles of some of your works.
Oh yeah, well, so I guess it's been since maybe 2019 when I first started incorporating Plains Cree, the language that my family learned and my dad spoke. That was the first language that he learned growing up. But yeah, I think increasingly it was becoming more important to include both languages. I didn't grow up being taught my Plains Cree language, so it's something later in life that has been my own kind of journey to learn. So I don't speak my language fluently, and I'm still learning, but it's important to me to include it so people can also see the language, and for me to, and also just in my learning journey of reclaiming my language and as much as I can, and so yeah, so for some of the titles and I'll have to include that in the book. It's really exciting because pretty much the entire book is translated into Plains Cree, which is pretty incredible. So it's a lot of work for the translator, but hopefully it can I don't know, I think it's really important just to as we go into the future start to include that within our just daily lives, the kind of the original language of these lands. So
agree. And when you come to the exhibition, you can actually hear some of the poems that Meryl has written spoken in Plains Cree, and that's also important to bring into multiple senses. So really, really great. All right. So I think I have one last slide, and Leah we can finalize. But thank you so much, Meryl. This was absolutely wonderful to hear directly from you and dive deeper into some of these images and questions and inspirations that you have done an incredible job with. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to work with you over this exhibition. So, and thank you
Likewise.
everyone for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Meryl, for sharing your work with everyone, in the exhibition and through tonight's conversation, and Laura for moderating this discussion. As I said in the beginning, we really encourage everyone to consider becoming a member of the museum. This is a great time to be a member. We have a number of great exhibitions on view, including Meryl McMaster's work. As a member, you can visit the museum as often as you'd like for free. There's always something new to see, as well as many other member benefits that I shared before. You can use the QR code on your screen to become a member now. And we also encourage you to consider supporting the museum through a donation that allows us to continue our programs such as this, our exhibitions such as Meryl McMaster's exhibition, and a variety of different community initiatives that we are working on. So these QR codes will stay up for a few more moments, and we encourage you to consider supporting the museum so we can continue doing this great work. And thank you everyone for attending, and we hope to see you at the museum soon.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Meryl.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.